Quick warning for this video, as it contains themes of body horror, mentions of self-harm, and amputee trauma. Now then, with that out of the way, let's get into it. As I'm sure you're all wondering what happened to Mateo and Quinn then, after hearing what happened to Carth and Adelaide. We will fast forward to come back to our present moment in time, after the team had met Lino and gathered the information of where they should head to next. The team was split to handle small odd jobs while their bosses set up what was needed for their travels. Mateo was sent with Fiona to scout out a plane ride. Sometimes supernatural events happen during travel, so they were made to go see if it happened. Traveling bait, basically. Fiona sat up front in first class, and yes, Mateo got the unfair end of sitting on the exact opposite end of the plane. All the way in the back. Which made it suck even more for Mateo, who was already not a fan of flying, plus he's a tall boy. So off he goes to the back, making sure to lower his head. He is then sat down next to an interesting window seat neighbor. A very short Asian woman with baggy clothes on and a messy mop of hair that covers her eyes. The first thing she did was ask him for the blanket and pillow in the compartment above his seat, as it seems she's been collecting them and making a nest in her seat to immediately fall asleep in. Like, seriously, just out, like a light, as soon as he gave him to her. Just out. Just, bye. From there, not much happens. He ends up stuck there for a couple of hours till he notices someone hasn't left the bathroom in forever. When he checks it out, he finds that the person is just gone. He can't find any idea besides a panel on the wall. Maybe they went through there? So he gets Fiona, and yes, he brought her to the bathroom and asked her for help in getting the panel off. In the bathroom. She was confused, but she agreed. It was during this that a tired feeling overcame Mateo. He figured that Fiona could handle this on her own. He was too big to go through there anyways. Like, come on, he's a big boy, big tree boy, and she's a... Okay, well, she's a well-muscled woman, but still. He'll just wait outside and keep watch instead. Make sure no one comes in. Yeah, that's what he'll do. Fiona raised an eyebrow at him, finding he was acting weird. But she reluctantly agreed. She did suppose she needed a lookout anyways. So he was the lookout. He returned to his seat next to the sleeping woman and waited, keeping an eye out until he felt something bump against his arm and... Oh great. He looks over and sees this woman ended up moving in her sleep and now her head is on him. Cool. Cool. Totally not uncomfortable at all. No. Being the smooth man that Mateo is, he just bumped her awake. Yeah, he just bumped her awake. And with a snort, she jumped awake and looked around like, what? Huh? What's happening? Are we there yet? No. You just, And Mateo pointed at her little pillow fort that she fell out of. She reacted a bit distressed about, like, oh no, it's... Hey, can you, like, help me put it back together? And Mateo actually did help her rebuild her fucking pillow fort. Once she was all snuggled up again, she said, "Thank you. I'm Chen, by the way. Who are you?" Mateo. Mateo, you should sleep. You look stressed. Well, he was definitely feeling something, but he couldn't exactly put it on stressed. He was just uncomfortable. So he told her no, He's good. Which she just shrugged and said, okay. And then immediately fell back asleep. Mateo sighed, some relief at not having to interact with her anymore, and looked back towards the bathroom. Nothing changed. So he just went back to keeping watch. He blinked once, twice. Slowly, he kept his eyes closed longer and longer with each blink, not noticing his body growing heavy as soon as he just fell fast asleep. There was no dream, no lingering darkness, no slow drift back. No. As soon as he was asleep, he jostled back awake and found all the lights out on the plane. It was quiet, and it was still, and empty. He was alone. He swore as he quickly got up from his seat and went back to check on Fiona. The bathroom was unlocked, and the panel that Fiona had removed, it was set back in place? What was going on? Did they leave him? Mateo began to grow frustrated as he stalked back out to try and open one of the plane doors, but it was locked tight. So Mateo did what any combat agent would do, and he kicked the thick metal door of the plane to open it. And to his credit, he did roll very high. And he heard a smash and a thud as something broke off and fell. But what he didn't expect, as he stumbled back, was that what fell off was his own leg. He looked in shock and horror as he found his leg laying on the floor in front of him. The stub of it, not bloody, but dry and crumbling away into sand. Shakily, he tried to collect himself, tried to stay calm as he looked through the plane and called out for anyone there. He didn't get a reply, but he did hear a sound. Something sliding through the overhead bins. Hesitantly, he opened it, and what he saw was a horrific mass of multiple disgusting gray limbs tangled together, an eye peeking out between the folds of skin and looking at him. Mateo stumbled back as crawled forward and fell to the aisle floor in front of him, twisting and sliding amongst itself until it was turned and looking at him again. Mateo immediately tried to run from it, but several hands shot out from it and grabbed onto his remaining leg. Through a burst of strength, he ripped his leg away from it, tearing the arms off in the same motion. It chased him down the aisle, slithering and hissing at him as he climbed atop the flight attendant cart. He then proceeded to elbow drop the thing. He smashed down onto it, causing it to let out a gurgled scream. It scrambled away from him as he sunk further down into the floor. Looking down, he sees that now his elbow is cracked and crumbling away into sand, something draining from him and his body becoming heavy. But this thing was still there, and it was still going for him, its unusually long fingers starting to grow claws, the index fingers getting abnormally longer and curved ones, like the talons of a raptor. It lunged for him and pinned him to the floor, hands holding him down and grasping at his head. Mateo struggled and fought against it, freeing his hands. He grabbed its cold arm and ripped it off. Angling it, he stabbed it, its own claws just ripping into its body, pushing it off of him as it lets out an ear-splitting screech. He gets it off of him, but at the cost of his arm as it's further damage to his elbow, causing the lower half of his arm to fall off. He was now down an arm and a leg, and this thing was still going for him! In Mateo's panic, he remembers the panel that Fiona crawled through. Maybe if he went that way, he'd find her. He'd find help. So through a scrambled mess, he fought his way to the bathroom, getting a big enough roll to just rip the panel off the wall, and began to crawl through this vent system, ignoring the slithering and gurgling from this abomination behind him. He found a trapdoor. No questions were asked at all as he immediately opened it and fell through. Suddenly, he was not in the plane anymore. He was nowhere near a plane, actually. He was falling through air of blazing heat, and below him were dunes of fine sand. And through it all, he sees bones and limbs sticking up from the hills, all of them collapsing and turning into sand, just like his own body. The only one unaffected was the woman sitting on top of the hill below him, Chen. She looked up towards him and held out her arms. The notion of beckoning and just sleep is read from her body language, as the wind blows her hair out of her face, and the last thing Mateo sees is her dry and hollowed out eyes. Then it all goes black. He doesn't feel an impact. He doesn't feel the heat anymore. He only feels his leg burning as something is plucked from within him. And then suddenly, a hand is shaking him, and he wakes up. Fiona is near him, looking concerned. He's outside of the plane, which apparently made an emergency landing. The rest is a blur for him, but Mateo learns that the rows in the back of the plane apparently died in their sleep. It was reasoned that a gas leak happened, but Mateo knew better. There was Chen. Except, the plane records never showed there ever being someone sitting in the seat next to him. There was nothing to prove it either, except the mark that was now branded on his leg. This was now the third, or technically like sixth, time this has happened to the members of their team. Confusion was being muttered all around, and Rena was doing immediate research to what these marks were on them. So much being focused onto research, caring for Adelaide, who had just woken up, collecting Mateo and Fiona back safely, and then apparently dealing with a package coming from Lino soon. The thought of keeping an eye on Quinn goes under the radar, as she's sent to do recon in a nearby town. Once she's dropped off, she does a bit of walking around, stretching her legs and getting used to the new mechanical leg that Svante made for her, the sturdiness of it giving her a bonus to kicks now. Thanks to some unfortunately bad rolls, nothing really happens for a long time. So Quinn is just left walking around, buying gifts for teammates at stores, and walking around a park. That's when something finally catches her eye. Or, well, more like catches her ear, as she hears two women gossiping and flat out shit-talking anything that they see. From the groundskeeping of the park to a dog to a scarred man walking by. And then finally, they even start talking about Quinn herself. Quinn ends up unable to stand it, and she dryly calls them out, sassing them until they shut up and leave. And then she notices that someone else is there. That scarred man she heard them talking about. He was awkwardly lingering around until she went up to him and introduced herself to him, shaking his hand, which he responded and introduced himself as Luther. They spent some time talking mainly about the women that were just here, which Luther tells her to not bother about them. How their lives are so boring that they need to pick on others to get amusement. But Quinn just places her hands on her hips and retorts how she can't just let them do so freely. So she spoke up, and she would again. She apologizes that they acted that way towards him, though. Which he doesn't seem to mind, really. He seems used to it. As they continue to talk, Quinn tries to learn some information from the man, but ends up short besides how this place can end up strange around Halloween. But that was a far-off date, so it couldn't be a lead for her to follow up on. A bit disappointed, she thanked him and then went her own way, not noticing the disappointment in her heart slowly turning into acid. Quinn tries to talk to more people, trying to find any rumor at all that she could follow. But everything seemed so nice, and everyone was so polite and friendly. It was pleasant. But Quinn was startled to find that her thoughts were not as pleasant. As she talked to these people, she mocked them internally, scornful of their relaxed lives while hers went to shit, feeling venomous anger at seeing their happy faces. It wasn't fair that they got to live in peace while she just... No, this wasn't right. She told herself and tried to straighten up, just focusing back on work. She began to head to a library after she heard of a ghost story from a child. She'll just go there, and her thoughts were hard to keep straight. They were hard to keep steady. The heavy sound of her metallic footstep just constantly interrupting her. She could feel the weight of it, hear the metal moving against itself and the wires. She could feel the tightness of her skin from every new scar since joining this damn division. And all the while she just hears these damn happy families all around her while hers was stolen from her. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. She just wants it all to go away. And so, it did. As suddenly, she wasn't outside anymore. Suddenly, she was inside a dilapidated building. It was quiet, and it was cold. Broken glass littered the floor, but there were no windows, and she was alone. Immediately, Quinn tried to call for Dakota, but found that her phone had no service. Seeing no choice but to keep moving forward, she readied her gun and warily started to walk. She found and heard no one, but she did end up in a room where the floor dripped wet with puddles, including old metallic carts and a rusted, outdated medical bed. Worn leather belts hanging from it. The sterile air unsettled her, but she investigated further. And as she did, she noticed that her reflection in the puddles did not move in time with her. So she stopped, and she looked. As it looked right back at her, pure resentment in its eyes. Quinn sees her reflection reach and grab a wire sponge off the cart, pull her shoulder straps down to reveal the large birthmark on her shoulder, and then begin to violently brush and scrape at it. Quinn gasps and immediately goes to run from the room as this happens. Suddenly, a voice that matches hers just echoes through the air, repeatedly muttering, "It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair." A burning sensation coming from her shoulder as it suddenly becomes scratched and raw and bleeding. Quinn runs faster until she ends up in a different room. A room with another decrepit setup of a hospital room. This time, a rusted surgery table and large lumps of flesh in the corner. To her horror, she realized it was a pile of legs, specifically left legs, cut from the knee down, just like hers. And from this pile, something crawled out from it. Her reflection, now a solid mass as it slithered up, the sound of flesh pulling and bones cracking as it stood up, staring at her with that same look of pure resentment of everything it saw, its shoulder raw and bleeding. Quinn yells at this imposter, at the room itself, at whatever had trapped her here, demanding answers. Was this just torturing her with the deep layers of her mind? The clone spoke up. "No. We're here to improve. Which one do you want?" And it looked at the pile of legs behind it. The color drained from Quinn's face as she asked, "What?" "Which one do you want?" "This one is nice, but it's too weak." "How about this one?" "It's athletic." "That's a good choice." Quinn felt bile rise in her throat as she realized what it meant. She aimed her gun at it and told it she didn't want any of them. She can't just erase what happened to her like that. She already has a solution, and she has to live with it. She doesn't want anything else. The clone grew enraged at this, fury burning in her eyes. It gripped at its own head, taking the flower bunched up into its fist and ripping it out of her head. Pain burned on her skull as blood started to dribble down, and this clone, this imposter, roared, "We will get what we deserve. We don't deserve this!" And then it grabbed its own prosthetic metallic leg and ripped it off with inhuman ferocity. And in that same motion, Quinn's leg shattered into metal shreds, making her fall over. She continued to try and fight it, to argue against this thing, believing it just a horrific twist of her mind. Did it want her to admit that Kadir was right? What did it want? She wasn't able to escape it as it dragged itself over to her, a scalpel in its hands. The clone's skin began to gray and tighten, lines of stitching appearing on it as it grabbed her. "I want to make us better. Where should I start? Here?" The clone points at her head. "Or no. I'll start here." And it aimed the blade for Quinn's heart. She tried to fight it, tried to say something to make it all stop. How there's nothing to make better about themselves. There's nothing to fix. This is them. But she was cut off, as the scalpel was plunged into her chest. A burning pain bloomed from her heart and spread, searing into her skin as her vision faded and went black. She didn't get to see everything go still and empty. She didn't get to see the large feet standing at her head. Luther looming over her and looking down with frigid eyes. No longer the awkward man that she spoke to before. He stared down at her body for a moment before turning and simply lumbering away. And as he left, so too did this haunting scenery, as it drained back to the empty streets of the town she was roaming before. What happens when she wakes up is something we will go over in the next video. For now, we will end it here. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until the next one, keep your heads above water. Bye.